I meet lots of interesting people who I want to help, and the best way for me to give back is to quickly share who they're helping professionally and who they wish they could privately or philanthropically help more. And I help you by keeping the interview short and sweet. People in my circle can pick and choose who to directly and indirectly help with their business or charitable contributions. Who are you helping? Don't forget to subscribe or follow me on YouTube and TikTok so they start paying me to do more content like this. Let's get started. Hey, how's it going? I'm Dan Fredenberg, and this is for Who Are You Helping? And today I'm joined with Ben Askins. How you doing today, Ben?
Not bad. How about you?
I'm fantastic because after all, I don't know if you know this, but my favorite audience member is joining us today. So that's fantastic. But just to let you in on exactly what's going on here, I'm a real estate guy from the internet. And that means I have to meet a gazillion different people. And sometimes there's someone who's doing something that I'm either super curious about it or I think that it might be of benefit to some people out on the internet. And what I do in that case is I have them on this show called Who Are You Helping to quickly share exactly what they're up to. But before we get too deep into the professional side and the main questions, Ben, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is Ben Askins. I'm a physician assistant. I was one of the last soldiers out of Iraq in 2011, and then I was one of the first soldiers to be trained to do psychedelic assisted therapy in 2022, just 11 years later, which is, I think, what you were most interested in is some of the work that I do both professionally for folks with PTSD in my ketamine assisted therapy practice, and then also some advocacy work that I do is a member of the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, trying to push the government agencies and regulatory bodies out there the direction of approving some of these psychedelic molecules for treatment resistant depression and chronic PTSD.
Wow, that's really amazing, and I think it's such an important thing. I think that there are huge swaths of society that want to sweep people's problems under the rug because they're just not convenient, and that's why I think it's absolutely vital to give more awareness to people who are looking for solutions and trying to work things out. But the first question I always ask in these "Who Are You Helping" interviews, it's really because of my background. After tech, I ended up turning into marketing. And in marketing, by far the most difficult part has to be what's called messaging. In other words, how do you say what it is that you do? Because there's someone out there somewhere who's giving you money on a fairly regular basis. And they don't do that for just no reason. So, what is it exactly that you do? So, that's the service that I wanted to basically embed in this little format here. But I'm going to take this opportunity, this question of who do you help professionally? Let's get a little bit more in detail and take a little bit of extra time because one aside for you to know, Ben and I met in Phoenix at a conference, and one thing that stood out about Ben is he's the type of person who would stop and really make sure that he's giving you your time to actually listen and give you the opportunity to spit out what you want to say. And just to make sure that we're doing that, let's get a little bit more into the professional side of treating. You said PTSD and depression. So for for me personally, I thought that everything was perfectly fine for me for like 40 years, and basically, I'm trying to think of how do you help someone who thinks they don't need to be helped? How do you help somebody who, like is unsure? So that way, like it's kind of framing my first question as what's the customer avatar? Who's the person who, if like even if you're not affected by these particular issues, maybe you could subtly drop their Ben's business card or something like that. So Ben, where do you want to take that?
Yeah, I wind up working with a wide array of what would fit into different avatars along the way. If you think of it as like a bell-shaped statistical distribution curve, I wind up working all along both ends, including people in the left tail, because I use ketamine assisted therapy in my practice. Ketamine is a rapidly acting antidepressant medicine that has some anti-suicidal properties that while we don't fully understand the mechanism of action there, it works pretty reliably to kind of quench suicidal flames in people's minds pretty often. So there are people who I see who their families bring to me because they don't want to be here anymore. So, like on the lower end of mental health, where people are kind of done with their time on Earth and their families drag them in, and sometimes I can help them to work through the drivers that are pushing them into that mental headspace and help them to, no longer be suicidal and get them into ongoing therapy around those things. That's one of the applications for the medicine. And then there's folks that I work with at the other end of the bell curve who are high performers. I have some professional athletes that fly in to see me who I do a certain amount of work with via telehealth, and then they'll come in for ketamine assisted therapy sessions around some of just the lingering issues that they may have in their performance. Maybe they're a professional football player who has some fear about a particular pass pattern where they really got their bell rung the last time that they ran that pass pattern, and now we're doing some targeted therapies around the trauma of that particular time they got their bell rung that helps them return to function, and everything in between. Folks who struggle with, mild to moderate to severe levels of just depression. I had one lady who had what we call the leaden symptoms of depression, where her arms and her legs just feel like lead, doesn't want to get out of bed, doesn't want to do anything. And she really wanted to sing at her daughter's wedding. And being able to get her on her feet and being able to, go to the wedding rehearsals and to the wedding and to have that energy was something that we use ketamine assisted therapy for as well. So there's a wide range of folks that the medicine could be beneficial for.
Okay, so I got two different things. I'm going to spit them out first. The one that's easier to forget, which is I think that we need to dig into rational versus irrational. I think that's going to be really important for diagnosing who's a good candidate, like who to think of in your life, who could really use that kind of help, especially if you're talking about ending your life. But the other one I want to get in real quick is that when it comes to real estate, I know my disclaimers. When it comes to products in general, I know my disclaimers, but I don't know, like I'm not an attorney, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not a medical health professional or anything like that. What sort of disclaimers are really common that you might need to say when you say something like ketamine rapidly assists with anti-suicidal urges.
Yeah, so it's something that winds up being used either in hospital, in an emergency room sort of setting, or in an outpatient setting as prescribed by a professional, right? These are all medicines that are scheduled medicines, Schedule 3 by the DEA, and that have to be prescribed and supervised whenever being administered. Being used, out in the wild as a drug of abuse or just taking the medicine all by itself isn't something that any professional would ever recommend. And over again, people do not get the sorts of psychiatric benefits from abusing these medicines and just using them out on the street. Number one, you don't know what you're getting. And it's no guarantee that just because somebody told you that they were getting you this particular medicine, that that's what you're actually getting. And number two, there's a very distinct way of approaching providing therapy around administering some of these psychedelic medicines that more reliably produce positive outcomes for people rather than being um, disturbing or creating problems for them. So absolutely needs to be prescribed by a licensed medical provider and supervised throughout the session. And there should be therapy that's taking place at regularly scheduled intervals for these medicines to be used at all, and cannot more highly recommend not using them as drugs of abuse.
I love that. I love that. Especially because one of the things I remember bringing up back in Phoenix was when I moved to Taiwan. I saw that one of the first things was at the bottom. It has this really intimidating message. It's like the penalty. I think when I arrived there, it was possessing or distributing drugs in the Republic of China is punishable by death, like right at the bottom of the
Right.
embarkation
Yeah.
card. So like like that was really intense. And so you didn't I was a guitar teacher in the 90s. Okay, so like the fact is, like, yeah, it's you were exposed to grass and things like that, and it's not something that I have to hide, because I live in Canada even though I'm from the internet. And now the government is more than happy to sell you weed or something like that. But out in Taiwan, I figured there that I noticed in different clinics and hospitals and whatnot, different literature on the dangers of different recreational drugs. And it surprised me to see that weed was not a concern there, even though it was just as illegal as any other recreational drug. That wasn't what I saw posters about. The one that I did see mention was ketamine, and in the list of dangers, I believe renal failure was one of the risks of overdosing. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think we kind of get around that entire conversation by saying that you need to be supervised, you need to be within the proper regulations and all that sort of stuff. But I want to give you a chance to add anything that comes to mind about that. Is there any message you want to share?
Yeah, ketamine is on the World Health Organization's essential medicines list. It is one of the safest anesthetic medicines that we've been able to develop for use in putting people to sleep and taking out their infected appendix. It's hard to beat in terms of its safety protocol with respect to how your heart and lungs are going to continue to function while you're on very high doses of ketamine to put you to sleep. That's the FDA approved in the US indication for the use of ketamine. Now, in a psychiatric context, we're using much lower doses for much briefer periods of time. And if you're seeing a professional, then you don't have to worry about a lot of the potential problems that are associated with high dose chronic abuse. Like you'd mentioned, there's some kidney problems. It's more common to have actually bladder function problems, a form of cystitis that can develop whenever people are just snorting rails of ketamine for grams and grams of it a day for multiple days in a row. You can do some damage trying to process all of the metabolites of that. Affects your bladder function. There's also chronic use suggests that there may be some difficulties with cognition that are associated with that, which is pretty common with high dose drug abuse of pretty much any kind. So that all that being said, the medicine itself, when administered properly, is incredibly safe. When administered haphazardly or as recreational or drug abuse contexts, there are a whole lot of potential pitfalls that people need to watch out for. I'm monitoring people's blood pressure and pulse ox, and sometimes we'll get an EKG on them to make sure that everything is going the way that it's supposed to be going whenever we're using this in a hospital or a therapeutic setting, right? So that's one of the big, there's a bunch of S's around this. There's safety, setting, that are really important pieces of this. And that's part of the S of safety is, the right dose at the right duration and frequency for the right person is what's going to keep them safe.
I love it. I love it. So let's get on to the next question. And the origin of the next question is because, as I mentioned, I'm from the internet, and everywhere I've lived, I lived in Taiwan for 15 years, and everywhere I've lived, there's always a push to shop local, and it's very important to support your local economy. But when you're from the internet, then you're kind of not local to anybody, and that's a problem for me. So I put on my thinking cap, and I was, well, how do you choose among the different internet-based professionals that are available? And I found one effective way is to find out who's the secondary beneficiary of the reception of these professional dollars. And that helps you choose more wisely with who you pick as a professional to help you in this way or the next. And one thing I like to emphasize specifically, the question is, who do you wish you could help more? And what I mean by that, and for many people, it's that they don't have enough clients to help, and so clients are definitely a great candidate for the answer. But the one I really want is because I want to normalize people asking for more time with their own families because it hasn't been a priority for too long. And basically it's the one thing, like, what's the point of having a great career or and eventually doing well financially if the time that is literally most valuable in your life is part of the price you pay? It's really not worth it. And so and of course we have some overachievers on the show who they have orphanages all over the world and things like that. And it's tough to compete with that. Now, I'm just kidding. But Ben, so professionally, philanthropically, otherwise, who's out there that you wish you could help more than you do right now?
Yeah, I mean the mental health crisis in America is kind of what I've driven my professional career towards working on is, working with people who are struggling to try to find, like there's stuff that people suffer from that treatment as usual works for, and that's great. If, going to therapy and taking selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor alleviates your depression, great, go for it. Stick with that standard of care. But there's upwards of two-thirds of people who that does not work for even after a fair trial of it. And I'd like to be able to help more and more of those folks. Unfortunately, some of these medicines are either currently Schedule 1 and not legal to be used outside of a research approved context, or insurance doesn't cover the service. Like the service that I provide in my private practice is cash pay only because the amount that it costs for me to pay the rent and cover my margins and all of those sorts of things, the insurance companies won't reimburse that amount. So the math just doesn't work. If we could get to where insurance companies were reimbursing reasonable amounts, it would make all the difference for both providers like me to be able to provide this to as many people as possible, and then for access to be available to folks who can't afford the prices that I have to charge to be able to stay in business. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. It also dovetails into the next question, which is by design, but in this case, it's even better. The next question is, how can people in the audience help you, as if the people in the audience are Santa Claus or the genie that comes out of the lamp or something like that? But the one that jumps out immediately would be anybody who is in the health insurance area. If this is something that you think is important to, I'll even blow it up and say to America's future, then I think this is that's one thing that you can do for Ben to get the ball rolling in that direction. And of course, at the end of the day, everything online is about awareness. So spreading awareness, I'm sure, is another great way to help Ben. But now that I've named off two, how can people in the audience help you?
Yeah, actually, the biggest group of people that I think would be able to help solve some of the access and funding problems even faster than the insurance payers are employers. There are benefit programs. Essentially, large enough employers decide what their employee benefit programs look like, and a piece of that is creating a relationship with an insurance payer, right? But there are companies like Enthea, Enthea, and Miko Health, Meeko, who are working with mid to large sized employers to create therapeutic benefits around ketamine assisted therapy in particular for their employees so that they'll cover, half or three-quarters of the cost, the same way that a patient would only have to pay a copay for going to see their primary care physician. These particular employers are making the access to mental health care more affordable. The prime example of this, the largest company that's on board in the United States, is Dr. Bronner's, the soap company that sells like the peppermint soap with the crazy labels that have all this stuff about Martians and millionaires, and it's super interesting when you're all alone in the shower to just read their whole bottle. But they're an interesting company that was an early adopter in that regard and have really set the standard to where if you're an employee at Dr. Bronner's, a certain number of ketamine assisted therapy sessions is just a part of your employee benefits package. And that will happen much faster than anyone will be able to convince large insurance payers to start to make changes nationwide. So that would be somebody who may not know that they'd be able to help out their employees very quickly.
Excellent, excellent. And then the next question is, how do people reach out? So me personally, LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. It's how I spend most of my time online. As far as other things that I can help people out with, you can check out Amazon.com. I've got a few different books on business skill building related subjects. But Ben, if people want to reach out to you, I've seen your podcast appearances happening more often on LinkedIn. But what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, my clinical website is advancedpracticeproviders.com, and you can just set up a free 15-minute consult with me if you're a patient that's interested in seeing whether or not ketamine assisted therapy would be something that would benefit you. That's an easy way to get a hold of me. And then I wrote a book and have a podcast. It's called The Anti-Hero's Journey. You can get the book on Amazon, or you can go to my website, antiheroesjourney.com, and see all of my nonsense there. It's all very unprofessional and very fun. I have the professional site and the non anti-professional site there as well, where I have a lot of fun. And then the podcast is available everywhere, Spotify and Apple and iTunes and wherever you like to get podcasts from.
All right, beautiful. And that's who Ben helps, that who he'd like to help more, and how you can help him and how to reach out. But my next corny question, Ben, is did you know that if the people in the audience hit the downright hideous subscribe button, then that helps me?
I believe it. I didn't think of it
Exactly.
until you said it, though.
Absolutely, absolutely. But getting back to the conversation, we're now into the extended territory right here. So now, as far as the other things I want to get across with you specifically, like we said, how to reach out. As far as geographic constraints, what states like have like a better system or something like that? What where exactly is the clinic?
Yeah, so I'm located in Louisville, Kentucky, and then I do some work remotely with an office in Lexington, and I'm also licensed in the state of Colorado, and I have some friends out there that run some clinics there. Then I do some coaching for people who are, all over the country, and consulting as well for people who want information about the science or the medicine. I'm available to do those sorts of things on a case-by-case basis. If you're talking about psychedelic assisted therapy more broadly, Oregon and Colorado have both passed legislation that have allowed for access to psilocybin in particular treatment centers in both locations. So if people are interested in looking into legal ways of gaining access in the United States, Oregon and Colorado are both kind of leading the way in their own ways around that. And then ketamine assisted therapy is legal in all 50 states. You can gain access through appropriate, medical consultations with providers available to you. And then MDMA assisted therapy is on the docket with the FDA for consideration of being rescheduled and no longer being a Schedule 1 medicine. And the decisions around that are supposed to be made in mid-August.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. So the other things that would be going through somebody's mind, then like you mentioned depression, but I guess if we were to compare it to what's really different about using like for example ketamine assisted therapy compared to speaking to a therapist for a while. I knew somebody for a long time who his title was general practitioner psychotherapist. So he had his medical degree and his medical license, but he did not become a psychiatrist because of the metaphysics. The really what I'm talking about is that medicine in general tends to be very materialistic in the sense of there's this thing called a human, and sometimes there's some bad bits. It might be an attacker of some sort, but that causes problem for this thing called a human, and we need to destroy that thing so we have a nice human that's okay, right? And sometimes people are having a bad day, not necessarily because of their chemistry, but because their life isn't that great.
Yeah.
And so like if I frame like the argument like just in the sense of that there's a person like that out there that exists, I guess a comparison between therapy and as in like talking to a therapist about what's going on and trying to get what's going on in your head, make some sense out of it, and put it in a way where you can like really get your head around what's bugging you.
Yeah.
And also I'll own up to the fact is I mentioned being a guitar teacher in the 90s. So I did have an experience with more magic mushrooms than I definitely should have had. And the guy who handed it to me even like told me as much the next day when I kind of half spooked looked at him and says like, yeah, so I had those. He's like, all of them? That was for like like how many people or something like that. Yeah, I know. So I know that when you go on a big time psychedelic journey of the type of where like the next morning you're looking in the mirror, it's like, oh, give me a second, oh, it's coming back to me, coming, ding. Okay, yeah, now I remember being that guy. And I wasn't really that guy yesterday. I was like all over the freaking place, right? So I understand the way that psychedelics can bring brand new novelty to your perception of reality. Most specifically, I think that you learn to. I think because we're so hardwired into our eyeballs, we really are visually overweighting our perception of reality by based off of what our eyes see. I'll believe it when I see it, sort of thing. But as soon as you have experience with your visuals no longer playing by the rules, for a few hours, right? Then
Mhm.
I think you start to realize, hey, there's more to this place than meets the eye. So that's some of the things that I found were beneficial about it. But back to the original question with that in mind, comparing talking to somebody about your problems, which it sounded like that's one of the things that you offer, but versus a like a ketamine thing. So like, what can you try to put your finger on what the differences are? What like what kind of cases where choosing one over the other is probably a good idea?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of therapy in general. I think it is beneficial to have those sorts of conversations where you're setting aside this time with a professional who is in the category of helping you through these problems. There's a lot of dynamics associated with doing some of the work of therapy, like in a church or with your friends or with your family, just by the nature of the definition of what those relationships are. It can be harder to get to being honest and authentic about what your problems are, even in the first place, in those settings where there's this, hey, there's this room where I'm going to sit down with a professional and I'm going to tell the real, raw, honest truth is worth the money all by itself some of the time. And then that person has a tool belt available for ways of trying to help somebody develop skills or to ask really good questions or to help somebody gain insight is the benefit of therapy in and of itself. But therapy can take a long time and is contingent on a lot of different conditions being met in order for somebody to succeed. And where psychedelic assisted therapy seems to work really well there, it's been called 10 years of therapy in a day. There are some things that having those medicines in your body for a period of time allow you to lower barriers, allow you to gain some insights that maybe you were even hiding from yourself. Because, like you said, being a person is a whole lot more complicated than just neurotransmission taking place between your ears, right? And we've thought of it that way for a long time in Western medicine as like biological psychiatry, like you mentioned, eliminative materialism, where we're just looking at stuff under a microscope is all that actually exists. And that's, I think, a big mistake. If we can just get the right medicine at the right dose and the right duration and frequency, that'll cure everything. Like if you have an infection and we give you an antibiotic, that takes care of it. Well, if you have a depression and we give you an antidepressant, that doesn't always work. The analogy doesn't hold because depression seems to be a lot more complicated condition than just what's wrong with this particular tissue in your body at this time. There are biological components, but also psychological and social and ethical and aesthetic and even spiritual components to being a person in the first place that just taking a pill isn't going to necessarily touch. It may be, I like to think of mental health as a percentages game, and you're pulling as many levers as you can to try to gain as much health as you can, but it's never going to be a 100% thing. It's not as if there's a magic bullet or a magic pill that can make all of that happen, but getting the right sleep habits, the right exercise plan, the right nutrition plan, the right activities of daily living, getting into a job that's, beneficial and rewarding and having positive social interactions and all of those sorts of things can help gain or maintain mental health. And then in addition to that, therapy and some of these medicine sessions can certainly accelerate and augment what's going on there. So I'm a big fan of therapy, and I think that this way of doing therapy helps people to accelerate through, decades of progress in a much shorter period of time.
Excellent. So I guess the next question before we give everybody back their day then is back in the day, psychedelics I heard were used as truth serums. And that was one of the things that I knew before my first psilocybin magic mushroom experience. And so I was on the lookout for that. I was trying to explain why. So, like you mentioned, the barriers coming down. And I think when you're talking about barriers, you're talking about reluctance to address, name, just even observe the truth. Somebody did cross a line, but you felt that that was okay. It was okay in that particular case, and then later on, you realize, oh, wait a second, that was not okay at all.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I find is that I found was the reasons to lie faded away. And I think that's why people when they're on a psychedelic, like somebody might call it that, even though I've heard that it's been disproved and there's no such thing as a truth serum. Is that something you want to comment on? Because like at the end of the day, if the person is like a secret uncaught criminal or something like that, there's a huge chance you'd let that slip if you're on psychedelics, I think.
Yeah. 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 The way that I think I try to explain it to people for sure is that there are things that take place in your brain when you're on a psychedelic medicine that have not been at those sorts of levels since you were very early in your neurodevelopmental stages. So we're talking about infancy and childhood levels of things. So that creates a period of what'll get called neuroplasticity, where your brain is a lot more open to making new connections and learning new things. But there's a level of authenticity and vulnerability that is associated with that, which is another reason why I strongly urge people not to just use these randomly in random times and places, but to use them in a place where you have the proper support and safety and setting around you to allow you to be a much more innocent version of yourself, a much more open version of yourself than you would be otherwise. And that can happen with some of these substances for a much longer period of time, like having a good, safe container around somebody for weeks after some of these sessions is the best idea rather than just sending you off into the wild. And now all of a sudden you think every Instagram ad that you see is actually meant for you to become a new billionaire or doing drop shipping with Amazon or whatever the case might be. You're just a lot more open and susceptible to some of those sorts of things that people can take advantage of. Innocence is just a fact of life at this particular stage in our development as a species. So what I'll tell people is imagine that you've got a baby's brain for the next month or so and do all the things that you would do to protect a baby's brain for your own brain. Feed it good food, give it light during the daytime and darkness at night. Don't shake it. Be kind, be gentle. Like you are growing new neurons at a much more rapid rate than you have ever since you were little. Be kind to yourself and surround yourself with kind people as much as you can.
Wow. What a message. What a message. Ben, thanks again for joining me. This has been absolutely fantastic. Please do make a point of hitting subscribe so that YouTube stops being such a deadbeat and starts paying for these videos instead of me. Then I can do stuff like this because I wanna. I get to talk to all these wonderful people. It's amazing. Thanks again, Ben, and thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Hey there, are you interested in commercial real estate deals? Would you like to build your network of investors and deal sponsors? Well, the best thing I can do for you is have you appear on a chance encounter interview as featured on dandoesdeals.com. You may know me from 506BME or as a top commercial real estate voice on LinkedIn. And if I had to think of the top factors in your success in commercial real estate, my top two would be your network and your ability to effectively explain how deals work with effective communication. The 15-minute chance encounter format, it checks both of those boxes, and they ensure that you can share your private deals with me without the SEC calling it a public solicitation. So hop onto LinkedIn. You can see my name is over here, Dan Friedenberg, and search for my name. And the best way to reach me and book that is to message me through LinkedIn. And don't worry, it doesn't matter if you decided to enter this space just last week or 2 weeks ago, or if it was decades ago. It'll be fun and easy to look good. We're just asking multiple choice questions based on your core competencies you look to contribute, your level of sophistication, and all that kind of stuff. So I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Does nothing but put more money in the pot.
Right.
If we talk about just the investor side, I mean, Shane talked about the sponsor side a little bit. I'll talk about the investor side. Okay, so you want the most money in terms of return with the least risk. All right, you want to do it yourself, you can go get 13 or 14%. You're going to do all the underwriting, it's not going to be passive.
If you bet, probably not.
I think I'd have to bet at least 2,500 before they fold.
And the pot is
4,000.
4,000. Yeah, I think you're right, but I'd rather just check.
Okay.
First position, you have the right of collection and the right of foreclosure or sheriff's sale, well, wherever you're at.